And welcome into a WarChant.com post-game podcast. Ryan Kelly alongside Gene Williams, founder and administrator of WarChant.com. Scoreboard's already off at Doak Campbell Stadium, which usually isn't a good thing because it usually means Florida State has lost a game they weren't supposed to. And Florida State just lost a game they weren't supposed to. You probably know by now, 27-21, your final score, the NC State Wolfpack over your Florida State Seminoles. 0-2 on the year for the first time since 1989. It's hard to believe it's been that long since the Noles have dropped to 0-2 on the season. But, of course, weird circumstances throughout this year have helped put that up. But, listen, I'm not going to put a cherry on top of a turd today. This was not a good one by any stretch of the imagination. Florida State looked out-coached at times. Florida State looked out-hustled at times. They looked out-prepared at times. And overall, NC State came in with a game plan. They executed it well. And now they leave with a victory.
Yeah, this is a little – you thought going into this they might be a little rusty after the layoff, the new quarterback. Really, it wasn't so much the quarterback. It was a lot of things you just kind of – you go, what in the world happened there? I mean, how does the defense continue to give up plays? I mean, we thought they were going to be a heck of a lot better, but especially against a very average NC State team to put in this kind of performance. And just time and time again, they couldn't make the big stop. The offense 6 times in the red zone came away with 1 touchdown. It just penalties. I think they had 11 penalties for almost 100 yards, and they always seem to come at the most inopportune times you could imagine. So, I mean, it was just one thing after another. Makes it extremely frustrating if you're a fan or you're a player or a coach to have to go home and reboot. You've got to really reboot the program. It's funny you brought up that 89 team. You want to talk about how things worked out extremely well. I think they would give anything to have that kind of scenario happen right now, but it's not looking good right now. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat this, like you said. A lot of things need to get fixed, and there's not much time to do it. It got a tough road game next week.
You mentioned that 89 team who ends up opening their season with a loss at the Gator Bowl against Brett Favre-led Southern Miss, and then losing at home to Clemson 34-23.
I was at both of those games.
Florida State ends up winning out on that season, but right now, I mean, I don't think anybody in their right mind would put the money on Florida State winning out this season.
No, I mean that's the thing that's really scary about this was supposed to be the season after a couple kind of rebuilding years. This was supposed to be the season where FSU was going to make a run at winning that ACC. They were going to be back on top of the conference.
And you knew that took a very tough shot after 12 goes down against the Alabama Crimson Tide.
Oh, sure. But that wasn't – I don't think that's why he lost the game. That's what's bad about this. I mean, Blackman could have – I mean, he missed some open guys at times. Obviously, he had that kind of fumble and things. But I didn't really think it was on the quarterback. I don't think that's why you lost this game, Ryan.
And regardless of quarterback, it doesn't matter if it's number 1 or if it's number 12 lining up. They can't tackle on 3rd and long. That's not their responsibility. That's not their job. And listen, let's just go piece by piece through this because there's a lot to get to. We'll start offensively, and offensive line had a up and down day against a very, very good front seven. And the thing is, people are going to be really upset about this offensive line performance. This is one of the things I'm least worried about because you knew you had an okay offensive line going up against arguably the best front seven in the country. Now, they played above their heads against Alabama, maybe played a little under that against NC State. And I understand that's going to upset some people. But here's the thing. You knew NC State was going to get home at times. You knew that was going to happen. Chubb's too good of an athlete, and that front seven is too good. But the fact that you really needed that at key possessions in the game, you needed that protection, especially in running the football at times, and it just seemed like in key moments you didn't always get it.
What comes to mind is that play to Amir Rasul that I know they've been working on that thing for really preseason. That was one of the ones they really thought they ran it time and time again in practice. I heard it worked every time, and it went to perfection, but they just did not get the block they needed. There's a little bit of pressure on Blackman. He underthrew that. And it's frustrating. 4 sacks, like you said. But here's the thing. Here's the scenario you didn't want. You did not want to fall behind in NC State and put him in a position where he's going to have to, when they know he's going to pass in long situations, it allows Nick Chubb, who had a field day today back there, and this experienced and very talented defensive front to get after the quarterback, after a freshman quarterback. So that to me is very disappointing. Those first couple series, both offensively, just going 3 and out, and letting them go down and score because you just could not fall behind in a game like this, and then everything just spiraled out of control from there on.
Running game-wise, Gene, I think the thing that really kind of is interesting to me is that you didn't run as much as I thought you would in this game. There were times where it just didn't seem like – I don't know if it was just me or you, but you have it in front of you. How many times did Florida State end up running the ball on this one?
Well, the two tailbacks ran 20 total carries. I'm not going to black when they put the sacks in those. They count those. I mean, so 20 carries, and they both averaged 4.7, 4.8 yards per carry. I mean, you were getting decent, really better running. I know we did the over and runners. I think we set it 100 for Florida State. They went just over that 100-yard mark. If you'd say they're going to average about 5 yards a carry, go over 100 yards, you think Florida State's winning this
football game. And on top of all that, yeah, it just seemed like it was that. And then, of course, offensively, if we're going to talk about the offensive problems, you have to start and end at the red zone. Florida State cannot. And this is not a shot on Ricky Aguayo because overall he had himself a decent day. He ends up hitting a lot of field goals. But the thing is, when you have an inconsistent kicker, and when you have a freshman quarterback and your defense is continually giving up third downs, you have to get 7 and not 3. And that was the problem for Florida State all day today. And it was also a problem against the Alabama Crimson Tide. There is a theme now occurring here.
Yeah, and I think it was a problem at times last year as well. And I know Jimbo Fisher always cites, hey, our red zone percentage is way up there. But the problem is, the red zone is with kicking field goals. I think if you go by the touchdowns, which you have to do, especially like you pointed out, if you're in a game where your defense isn't at its best, you're going to have to turn those 3s into 7s, and they didn't do it. I mean, they convert a couple more times. FSU wins this game down there. They don't do it. But, again, a lot of it's on a team that's very good against the run, and you've got a freshman quarterback. So, I mean, that's a tough situation to try to get those, and they weren't able to do that. And it hurt a little bit. We can talk a little bit about injuries while we're at Auden Tate, who was having a monster game. They just had no defense for Auden Tate. He was just tearing it up
and it was very clear that was the guy who a young freshman trusted the most.
Yeah, they had a great connection, and I think that it hurt FSU, especially in that red zone down the stretch when he would have been available, and he's probably your prime target in there. So, I mean, that hurt a little bit. You know, Jimbo Fisher, it didn't sound like he's very cryptic with the injuries, but it didn't sound like it was that serious. Maybe he'll be back next week, but hopefully it's not one that he's going to miss. If he misses, maybe it's only 1 or 2 games, which is good news. And the same thing with Matthew Thomas, just to round that up. It's a back injury is all we know. We don't know how serious that is. Hopefully we'll have an update for you on warchant.com here in the next day or two.
And, Gene, this is where those little problems that you've heard about, and you've heard Jimbo Fisher talk about, and you've heard the whispers of, come into play. Because when you have a true freshman playing quarterback, you're going to go with guys who you trust, guys who are consistent, guys who run sharp routes. What's the thing we haven't heard about Naquan Murray? What's the thing Jimbo Fisher always likes to say? He needs more consistency out of him. What's the thing he said about a lot of the receivers on this team? I need more consistency out of them. We know they're talented, but they're the guys you got to rely on now, not your quarterback. Those are the guys who have to step
up. A little surprised, and maybe it's a thing with the checkdowns. I think one of DeAndre Francois' favorite targets was Ryan Izzo, and I'm looking. I think he had one pass thrown to him. He didn't complete it. So I mean, there was one attempt to your tight end, and he was definitely a bigger part. I think he would have been a bigger part of the offense had Francois been here, especially in those red zone. We're talking about that. A lot of times you got a pretty reliable tight end. Maybe that's something they need to look at. But that red zone's got to be cleaned up. I still think that's probably the second storyline. I think the first storyline is the defense. You can't be giving up 27 points. You can't be giving up 3rd and longs consistently. When you've got them, and again, it was a bit of a long shot with about a minute left. You would have had to drove the field for a touchdown with a freshman quarterback against defense, but you give up a 3rd and 7 when they're going to have to run the ball to eat the clock up, and they do that down your throats. That's a little surprising against what was supposed to be one of the best defenses in the country. You don't see teams do that against Alabama. You don't see them do against the better defensive teams. So I think this game tells me we were, once again for the second straight year. I don't think this defense is as bad as last year's, but I think it was overrated going into the season.
And that's kind of why I save defense, because I feel like there's a lot to chew on here. I'll tell you what really frustrates me, Gene, is I'm not here to claim I'm a great X and O's guy. I never have. I never will. But here's what I do know. Numbers rarely lie in sports. NC State, with Ryan Findlay under center, is very good at keeping control of the ball. They're very good at taking the air out of the ball. This was exactly the game they wanted to play. Take a lead early and keep the ball. That's what they do. It's what they're very good at. Why, oh why, is Florida State lining up to strip the ball instead of just wrapping and tackling? Why is that happening again and again? Because I don't know, maybe I'm crazy here, but I feel like I saw that a lot instead of just take a guy to the ground.
Yeah.
Because you know what? If it's 2 yards on first, 2 yards on second, 2 yards on third, that's 4th and 4 and a punt. Instead of, well, maybe I can get them to strip this ball. That's arrogant. That's extremely arrogant if Florida State thought they were going to take the ball out of that team that rarely does that.
Yeah, it's and the thing that's frustrating, you brought about that up. The one thing they do, it reminds me of really kind of that team they've had before with Glennon a little bit, that they're just ball control. They're not going to really try to take shots downfield. They're not going to put the quarterback in position to get sacks or turn the ball over. They're very methodical about it. They want to eat up that clock and move the ball, which they did perfection against FSU. But when they do that, when you do get that third and long situation, you cannot give that up. I don't know how many they did. I just remember that first touchdown drive. They had a 3rd and 13, Ryan. A 3rd and 13 that they gave up. Would have been nothing. They had the ball in their 36. Would have been a super long field goal attempt, but I don't think their kicker even has that range, or it would have been a punt. Instead, that puts you down right off the bat. I'm sorry, there was a field goal in that first drive. It puts you behind right off the bat on that kind of situation, and it happened over and over and over again. It wasn't just it wasn't much of 3rd and 1s when they were giving up those plays. It was some 3rd and longs, having the big penalty. Now, that was a horrible call. We can talk about that if you want to, the targeting. And I asked Coach Fisher, you can listen on a War Chant. We've got the post-game press conference. And I've never seen a guy get nailed for a targeting, putting up his hands at a quarterback who's throwing the football. That's what you're talking about.
And not even leading with the head.
No, there was no head. I don't even understand the explanation of how that's. And Jimbo said he's never seen anything like that. He doesn't see how that's targeting. I don't either. I'm watching pro and college for years. I've never seen that call before.
And I'll tell you what's crazy about that, because it's often, I mean, especially when you have Jeff Flanagan's crew, it's easy to write off, well, it's Flanagan's crew. They make a lot of mistakes. It's very, very – and it is. And I understand I sound like a tinfoil hat guy here, but it is very, very suspicious that it just seems like every time they play Florida State, there's a lot of weird hankies on. There's a lot of weird hankies that get waved off. But the thing is, that didn't even come from Flanagan's crew. That's centralized replay. That's centralized review that said that's targeting. That's centralized review. Flanagan's crew didn't even throw that flag on the field, and somebody who is away from that ball game looked at that and said, that's targeting. That's insane.
Yeah, that is. And I'll be curious. Unfortunately, the way the system is, you know what they're going to do? They send the film and get an explanation. It's all off the record, so we probably may never find out. I mean, I will, of course, follow up with Coach Fisher later in the week and see what he says, what kind of feedback he gets from the ACC, but generally that's supposed to be kept off the record and handled behind closed doors, which I hate in a situation like this, because I think, fans pay a lot of money to come to games and to give booster contributions. They deserve an explanation on when something that bizarre happens. You need an official explanation from somebody. What in the world? Has the rule changed? Maybe it is targeting. Maybe they changed something in the rule I don't know about. If you hit anybody like that, so I don't know. Can you not put your hands up anymore when somebody's throwing a pass? If you may knock into them, I don't know. But yeah, we definitely need an explanation on that.
Listen, I said it a little tongue in cheek on Twitter during the game, but I stand by it realistically. Joey Crawford and his NBA crew was terrible for years. Carl Hess's crew in college basketball was terrible for years. Jamie Luckey, TV Teddy Valentine. I mean, you could go down and you can list bad crews by name. I don't know if in person I've ever seen a crew as consistently bad as Jeff Flanagan every time I see him in person.
And they always seem to put him in. This was a big game, and you put him out here with Jimbo Fisher again. You'd think they would somehow at least try to steer him away from Coach Fisher, since consistently there seems to be controversy. There seems to be missed calls all the time when he's around. But, we've written about that before. We talked about it. Florida State, again, you said the tinfoil hat. It seems like they get the lion's share of a lot of questionable calls. It seemed like every one of these 50-50 calls, and I think some of them were good calls. I think the touchdown, the fumble, they're really close calls, but they win against FSU as well. They don't never seem to get the breaks on that end. But yeah, I don't know what the solution is, because it seems like every year there's a game or two where we talk about this with some bizarre circumstances and some bad calls. Obviously, Clemson game last year, and nothing it seems to change. It comes back a few games later, and the same thing happens.
So we talked offense, we talked defense. Let's talk special teams for a second, because if you are looking for your lone bright spot of the day. Ricky Aguayo, Logan Tyler, Derwin James, have yourself a day, guys. And I'm not trying to polish this up, but what I am saying is, if you had one question that you wanted answered this week and you got it answered well, it's special teams. Logan Tyler gave you an opportunity to win. Ricky Aguayo gave you an opportunity to win. Derwin James' return off the safety gave you an opportunity to win. There are a lot of places you can pin this loss. It's not on the place that a lot of people thought it would be if you lost this game on Saturday.
Yeah, I figured if they're going to lose NC State, we're going to have another special teams meltdown like you did against Alabama. They're going to have to muff something. Something's going to get blocked. If anything, they're the ones who got the block. And, and they played on the whole well. Again, Ricky missed the first kick, but you give me that any time. Absolutely, I'm taking that. It is surprising. To go back, I looked it up while we're here just because, again, I'll probably write about this in my 5 Takes column, which will be up on Sunday on warchant.com. But, yeah, you had 2 3rd and 9s, the 3rd and 7, and the 3rd and 13. So those are 4 3rd and long plays during the game that were absolutely huge for Florida State to give those up. And that's against a team like this you can do. But our boy, back on special teams, sorry to get off there, but our boy Logan Tyler, 47 yards a punt.
And a 51-yard boomer.
He broke that over-under, not even close.
A bouncer inside the 5-yard line.
Yeah.
He did everything that he was asked to do today. And you tip your cap to the kid. I said it on Twitter. I said it during the game. That 51-yard boomer, the one you saw bounce inside the 5, when we tell you on Wake Up and we say, in our practice reports or on the Tribal Council or on Twitter or whatever, Logan Tyler's been booming the ball in practice, what you saw today is what he looks like. That's what he looks like.
And it's the thing. I don't know what it is about Florida State. It took Case and Beatty 4 years before he did that. Hopefully this is the turning point, and Logan Tyler, it only took him a little over a season to be able to live up to his potential in practice. But there are some encouraging signs. The kicking was better. The special teams were better. It seems like you traded in one problem for another with the defense having these breakdowns and not coming up when they needed to come up, and excessive penalties, everything else that you can look at as problems for the game. Well, let's look ahead a little bit, Ryan. Next week, it's definitely a little dicey. Your next 2 weeks, you got Wake Forest up there, and that's a tough Wake Forest team. You hate to say it, but they're a decent team. They might give you a hard time up there. And then you got to come back home and play Miami, who's going to be sky high. They're going to be smelling blood, especially if FSU lays an egg up at Winston-Salem.
Wake is well-disciplined. Wake is well-coached. Wake's got a good defense, and they're undefeated right now. They have to feel good about if Florida State's going to look like that next week, especially on third down defense.
Oof.
You have to feel good about where you are if you're the Deeks. And I'm not trying to be the gloom and doom guy, but, we talked about the players on the field. I think it's only fair, Gene, to turn about and say, where was the preparation in this game from the guys who were paid to prepare?
And I'm 3 weeks.
In reality, you had 2. That first game you're preparing for ULM, and you're just kind of licking your wounds after that Alabama game. But you had 2 weeks to practice and prepare. You knew that Miami game was going to be moved. You got back to practice that Tuesday. You had 2 weeks. The guy on the other sideline is not exactly known for being a genius, and he came in and he outcoached you from start to finish.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not as much on I don't know about schematically or anything like that. It seemed more like a motivation that the players were not. It seemed like big play after big play they didn't do. I don't know if it was so much coaching. Some of the calls Doring did were idiotic. Some of those throwback plays
he got
near
way
the goal
too
line
cute.
were ridiculous.
He got way too cute at times, and it almost bit him.
Though he had to get bailed out by that ridiculous targeting call on that silly play that had no business even happening.
But I'll also give him credit. Both those shovel passes were brilliant.
The shovel passes
great calls.
Yes, they did work well. So, there were some good calls. I'm not as bought on the out-coach thing. It just – in terms of the X's and O's, I don't think that was really the problem. That was, like I said, the defense makes the stops they're supposed to make. If the offense does, maybe in the red zone again, but you're dealing with a freshman quarterback. The playbook is so limited in that situation, and for half the game you're without your best receiver. So I think a lot of things went against you, but I really think this is more about an execution type thing than really being outcoached. That being said, you said you had a couple weeks. You probably should have come up with something a little bit better than this. So it's disappointing. Like I said, we got Wake, Miami coming up. And it's really, there's no wiggle room. You effectively, for this to be an okay season, you effectively have to run the table at this point.
And I think here's the thing for me. The thing for me is at the end of the day, you knew you were starting a freshman quarterback. And you knew that even though I don't think James Blackman had a bad day overall, there were some times where he looked like a freshman. Those first 2 drives weren't great, but it's a true freshman starting his first ever game, and it just so happens to be a home opener, a conference opener, and there's little room for error. You're willing to give James Blackman a mulligan. But the thing is, that's when the rest of the team has to rise around you.
Yeah, well, that's why I put it on the defense. You cannot go down 10-0 in the first quarter when you know you got a freshman quarterback. You're supposed to be the strength of the team. You can't do that, then be down 17-7. You were down 2 scores for a good portion of the game, and that was on the defense. And it put FSU and it put Jimbo Fisher and a freshman quarterback in a position they did not want to be in. That's why number one on me is that defense, and it's very disappointing because that was supposed to be what was going to – even if it was DeAndre Francois was there, it was going to be the defense that was going to carry you this season. The reason why you were picked preseason to win the ACC was that defense. And again, we'll see that it's one game. They did look pretty good against Alabama. It's one game, but boy, it looks like we may have missed the boat again on thinking this was going to be good defense. And, again, getting way ahead, and I know people are going to be I'm sure every other post on the message board is fire Charles Kelly. But if he has a few more performances like this and FSU does lose 3, 4, 5, 6 games, whatever it may end up being, I think Jimbo Fisher's going to have no choice but to make a change at the end of the year.
Well, it's just the idea that, Jimbo Fisher, one of the criticisms that I've always found is very fair of Coach, and it's the loyalty to assistants who maybe don't deserve the loyalty. And once again, I'm not saying fire Charles Kelly now. I'm not saying fire Jake Graham now.
They're not doing this midseason. Don't go yelling for that. He's not. There's nobody on staff who can step right in and be defensive coordinator. They're not. Even if Wake scores 40 on him next week, they're not firing the defensive coordinator.
But until there's consistency and all that, and we talked about this on Friday when we were doing our picks, Gene, and I'll wrap it with this. These weekends in college football where you look and you say there's no good games, there's nothing interesting, these are always the chaos weekends. As we speak right now, Cal and USC are in a dogfight. Tennessee just held off UMass. Mm-hmm. Oklahoma State, as of right now, is losing to TCU. Clemson is only up by a touchdown, 7-0 at the half against Boston College. These are those type of weekends. You want to know what? The Alabama Crimson Tide, it's not that weekend for them. You want to know why? Because they're all over the supposed best defense in the SEC. They are running through Vanderbilt. You want to know why? Because there's consistency. Consistency. You didn't get consistency out of your defense today. You haven't gotten consistency out of your special teams so far this season. Offense, once again, you're willing to let it slide a little bit with a freshman quarterback. Yeah. But until Florida State achieves consistency again, you're going to end up with games like this.
Yeah. No, it's amazing, and I'm just looking at the depth chart right now. I mean, the starting unit, I think conservatively you can say at least 8 of those guys are playing in the league. You can't have guys who are that much talent and all that experience, and then when you're relied upon in a game like this when a freshman quarterback's going to come out, I know I'm harping and I'm just beating a dead horse here, but those guys needed to come through, and frankly they didn't. It's embarrassing. They need to play better than this.
We've got plenty more thoughts. Of course, these are just straight reactions. Once you get a look at the numbers, once you get a little bit more time to process this, we're going to have Wake Up War Chant on Monday. Ryan, or of course, I'm Ryan. I'm going to have my thoughts. Drew will have his thoughts. Gene, you'll have your thoughts. And, of course, head coach Jimbo Fisher slated to join us as well for Monday's show. So make sure you're there with that. Make sure for all the post-game analysis, we'll have a notebook up. Gene will have his 5 takes up. Plenty of good stuff from Brian Clark and Irish Affel as well. Stick with warchant.com. As for us, we'll talk to you on Monday.